harbor below, and his anger fades. The attack is already unstoppable. 7:53 a.m. Fuchida delivers a message that will ring out throughout history forevermore. Tora, Tora, Tora. The message is sent to the aircraft carrier Akagi, where Vice Admiral Nagumo has been waiting for news from the front lines. Admiral Yamamoto is also listening in and overhears the message via a ship's radio back in Japan. Yamamoto and Nagumo breathe a sigh of relief. The message is clear: the Americans have been taken by surprise as intended. They had no idea the attack was imminent, and Japan's forces have a huge advantage. 7:55 a.m. The first wave of the attack begins. It consists of just over 180 aircraft. That includes 49 Nakajima B-5N bombers with armor-piercing bombs. They're the heavy hitters of the wave, the ones with the biggest bombs and the most devastating damage potential. There are 40 more B-5Ns with Type 91 torpedoes following behind, along with over 50 Aichi D-3A dive bombers with general-purpose bombs. These bombs are much smaller than those in the B-5Ns, but can still cause a lot of damage and chaos on the ground. Lastly, the wave also features 43 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters, whose job it is to protect the bombers, fend off any American fighter planes, and rain down fire on ground targets. Fuchida leads the bombers towards the harbor. Just as they practiced back home in Japan, the pilots drop down low to launch their torpedoes, while fighters race ahead to deal with any American fighters that might try to counter them. However, thanks to the element of surprise, there isn't any time for American fighters to take off. Fuchida scans the ground below and doesn't see any gun flashes. The first bombs are about to drop without any resistance at all. Wheeler Field is the first target to be bombed. More bombs fall on Hickam and Bellow Field, and Japanese fighters quickly cut down the few American fighters that managed to leave the ground. Waterspouts shoot out from the harbor waves. Japanese fighters make strafing runs across the airfields, firing on anything that moves and hitting many of the stationary aircraft on the ground as well. Meanwhile, the bombers continue to rain down terror and destruction from above on their main targets, the battleships. Fuchida, well aware that Yamamoto and the other admirals are anxious about the attack, orders a message to be sent back to the fleet, relaying the success of the attack. 8:10 a.m. The bombers speed down towards the ships, honing in on their targets, with many focusing on the USS Arizona, a standard-type battleship built back in the 1910s. Not all of the attacks are successful. In fact, Fuchida later recounts that his own aircraft has the timing wrong on its first run, and several other bombers have to take up to 3 attempts before succeeding in hitting their targets. Fuchida's craft is preparing to begin its own second run when he and his crew are distracted by the sound of a gigantic explosion. A booming blast fills their ears, and a huge plume of dark red smoke rises from below, stretching hundreds of feet into the air. It's from the Arizona, which has suffered a critical hit to its powder magazine. For those on the ground, it's a nightmare come to life. But for those in the skies, the sounds of gunfire and explosions are positive signs of their successful surprise attack. 8:17 a.m. It takes some time for the Americans to respond to the attack and mount any kind of defense, but by 8:17 a.m. they manage to claim a small victory, as the USS Helm fires at and sinks one of the Japanese submarines patrolling the harbor's entrance. The American forces also quickly rush to their anti-aircraft guns and attempt to fire on the bombers and fighters. They damage some and even send a few craft spiraling to the ground. Still, the Americans are suffering far worse than the Japanese. The damage is piling up faster than anyone could have imagined. The USS West Virginia is hammered by relentless bomb and torpedo hits, its hull torn apart. It drops straight to the harbor floor. The USS Oklahoma takes hit after hit. Torpedoes rip into its side, one after another. The massive battleship rolls over helpless. The USS Utah goes down too, and then the USS California, the pride of the Pacific Battle Force, takes a direct strike, sending water rushing in. As it begins to sink, its crew has no choice but to abandon ship. The harbor is turning into a graveyard. Almost all of the major vessels in and around the harbor are damaged, and the Japanese pilots soar across the skies, surveying the impact of their extraordinary assault. Then, having dropped their bombs and fired their torpedoes, the planes of the first wave begin to make their way back to the carriers, while the second wave pilots prepare to enter the fray. Fuchida, however, stays behind, flying over the scene of bombarded Pearl Harbor to assess the damage and watch the second wave play out. He remains in that position, watching with pride as the bombs rain down in the name of Japan and the Emperor. Nagumo, meanwhile, is back on the Akagi, anxiously listening for reports from the site of the battle and celebrating every successful hit as he plans the fleet's next moves. 8:54 a.m. The second wave of the assault begins. There are approximately 171 planes making up this part of the assault, including 54 B-5N bombers, 81 A-3A dive bombers, and 36 A-6M fighters. The bombers carry general-purpose bombs rather than the heavy armor-piercing ones used in the first wave, so the explosive potential of this wave is smaller than the last. Because of this, the second wave doesn't do the same level of damage as the first, but it's still devastating in its own right, and the bombers have little trouble hitting their key targets. They deal some serious knockout blows to the U.S. forces on the ground and in the water. They target the USS Nevada, which has already taken a few hits in the first wave and is trying to sail away. 7 or 8 successful bomb strikes hit it, ending any hope of escape. Several bombs also land on the USS Pennsylvania, which bursts into a fiery blaze, while 2 destroyers moored nearby are completely wiped out. The USS Shaw is badly damaged and later suffers a massive explosion, causing the entire vessel to split into 2 pieces. 9:30 a.m. With ships still slipping beneath the waves and explosions echoing across Pearl Harbor, the second wave of Japanese aircraft peels away from the chaos. One by one, they turn north, heading back toward their fleet, miles away beyond the horizon. Far from the destruction, Vice Admiral Nagumo stands on the bridge, deep in thought, planning his next move. In all, 129 Japanese lives have been lost in the battle, with up to 60 aircraft destroyed and 74 damaged. But those losses pale in comparison to those on the US side. In short, it's a resounding victory for Japan, and the surviving pilots and crew members know that they have played their part in a historic encounter. 10 a.m. The first wave has been a huge success. The second wave has also done well, though suffering more losses as the U.S. forces scramble and fight back. At this point, Vice Admiral Nagumo has a massive decision to make, and it's one that will prove fateful not just for the attack on Pearl Harbor, but the entire fate of the world in the years that follow. Should he give the order for a third wave of attacks, or is it time to order a full-scale retreat and take the strike force back to Japan? There are pros and cons on both sides. If he goes ahead with the third wave, it will undoubtedly do even more damage to the U.S. forces and supplies. It could more or less put the entire base out of action. If the bombers are able to successfully destroy the fuel oil reserves and repair facilities, the damaged ships will then be irreparable. However, it's clear that the American defenses were getting stronger and more organized. They have a better chance of fending off a third attack. Nagumo's cautious nature starts to take over. He doesn't like taking risks that don't seem necessary and prefers to make considered, calculated decisions with the men and resources under his command. He fears a third wave will result in many more losses. He also worries that the Americans might do more than just defend themselves. They could possibly launch a full-on counterattack. His fears are compounded by the fact that there were supposed to be several American aircraft carriers in Pearl Harbor at the time of the attack, but they aren't there. He worries they might be somewhere nearby, ready to retreat to the base and attack the Japanese forces. Lastly, Nagumo has to consider that the Kido Butai still have a long journey back to Japan. It needs all the fuel it has. Spending more fuel on another wave of attacks could put the whole fleet's survival and return voyage at risk. Even if a third wave went well, daylight is fading. The planes would still have to fly back and land on the carriers at night, which is much more complicated than landing during the day. So weighing up all the factors, Nagumo makes the call. There will be no third attack. The first 2 waves, in his view, have done enough damage. He has no idea where the American aircraft carriers are, and the risks of prolonging the attack are just too big compared to the possible rewards. According to several accounts, various other officers like Fuchida and Genda urge Nagumo to rethink his decision, but ultimately, he is the one in charge. His decision proves pivotal. Years after the attack, historians and military experts have argued that a third wave may very well have changed the entire course of the Second World War. It's possible that had Japan done further fatal damage to the base, it may well have been able to pursue its imperial conquest across Asia. Cheers erupt across the fleet. To many, it feels like a decisive victory, proof that Japan's rise was unstoppable. And as they begin the long journey home, spirits were high. The future looked brighter than ever. With Pearl Harbor burning behind them, they believed that they had struck a fatal blow, one that would secure Japan's dominance for years to come. But not everyone was celebrating. Some felt a deep sense of unease. They had struck a mighty blow, but had they awakened something even more dangerous? What kind of response would the Americans unleash? The attack lasted just 1 hour and 15 minutes. There were over 2,400 U.S. military members and civilians killed. 3 ships were completely lost and never returned to service: the Arizona, Oklahoma, and Utah. But the aftermath ultimately proved disastrous for Japan. The very next day following the assault, the U.S. entered World War II, declaring war on Japan as well as Germany and Italy. Japan's imperial ambitions would be crushed as the U.S. and its allies battled to victory in the largest global conflict of all time. The attack on Pearl Harbor changed the course of history, but how might things have played out differently? Do you think Japan's decision to hold back a third wave was a mistake? Or was war with the US inevitable no matter what? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Now go check out What If a Single Modern Aircraft Carrier Traveled to 1941 Pearl Harbor, or click on this video instead.